Good evening, salutations, and welcome to Curious Formula Live. I am your host, your moderator, your guide, Curious Formula. Thanks for rocking with your boy. We're having some technical difficulties in the studio if you haven't seen yet, because you can't see me. But we're going to go on as planned. As Queen said famously in their song, the show must go on. Well, the show must and will go on. Before we get into our topics of discussion tonight, you know what you have to do. You have to subscribe, like, put some comments in the comment section. Let me know you're rocking with me. Ask any questions. We're here. We're open to talk about all the things you want to talk about. But it's important that you subscribe here. We're trying to build this thing as we fly. And your participation and what you have to say matters to how we do this, because it matters why we do this. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into our first conversation here. Thanks again, folks, for being with your boy. All right. So what is happening in the world that is politics today in America? We're less than 20 some odd days. Actually, we're less than 20 days before the election by the time of this broadcast. And we're very happy with the coverage that other people are not doing, but that we are doing. And I feel very confident that we're providing a service that other people are not. And you can tell by the example of what we're going to talk about today. So while you can't see me, let me know if you can hear me by putting a 1 up in the comment section. Let me know that you can hear what we have to say, and we'll keep going on. So 6 examples of why Kamala Harris has a plan to win and Donald Trump does not. 6. That's all there is. 6 examples that shows Harris has a plan to win while Donald Trump does not. First reason why Kamala Harris is illustrating that she has a plan to win is because of how she's organized her fall campaign. State offices, hundreds of them in battleground states, thousands of canvassers that she procured and that she built, that she called upon, that she got to join via her website, via her announcement, via the Democratic Party and the like, spread out over all the battleground states throughout this great land of ours. And they're doing the hard labor. The reality is that she is part of an unprecedented movement, an unprecedented action. She is part of a replacement of the top of the ticket with a little over 100 days left before the general election, something that's never been done in the modern era ever at all. And she recognized that not only did she have to introduce herself to voters for the first time, we only see her as vice president. And let's be honest, most people don't even know who the vice president is. To quote a famous vice president under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the vice presidency is not worth a warm bucket of spit. And many feel that way about actually having to know who the vice president is. And so they didn't know who she was, and she had to build this campaign very quickly and get on the ground very quickly. And she needed thousands of volunteers to be able to do that. Kamala Harris's race hasn't really been against Donald Trump. If you look at polling and how trends have gone, it's really been against the clock to try to put together a campaign in her name with her likeness, with her policies and her viewpoint and her biography and her plans and priorities for the next 4 years, and getting that to as many Americans as possible, because I think she recognized that it is a better vision than her counterpart. But that shows she has a plan, and she recognized it early and started moving towards it. The second example that shows Harris has a plan is that she hired a rural outreach director, and she is engaging that outreach director with actual outreach to rural areas, and jointly with the push out of Republicans for Harris, which is an actual and factual organization out here doing big things and swinging big wood for that particular candidate and her candidacy. Why is that important? Well, she hired David Plouffe, and if you don't know who David Plouffe is, who worked on the Obama campaign, was Barack Obama's campaign manager in 2008. He's literally the best targeter in the history of American politics. The man knows how to go into a community, identify where your votes are, and then develop techniques to go out and get your votes to make sure they come to the polls and vote for you. As somebody who was the first elected official in the entire state of New Jersey, and I will always continue to say that because it's one of my proudest moments from being an elected official. I had the pleasure of working with David Plouffe and watching his intellectual prowess at work when that man helped to win the nomination by identifying caucus states that nobody had contested in to find ways to grab basically all the delegates from those caucus states to fight the advantage that Hillary Clinton had in big states. This man is a targeting genius, and basically you ought to read his book about how he won the 2008 campaign, not because you necessarily agree with Barack Obama, but you will learn how to run a campaign from the bottom up. And that's what this man did. And so as part of that, David Plouffe's whole idea and notion is to go after votes in places that Democrats probably would not think to go to find them, and to identify even those votes that Democrats may not think would actually come out for them. That, I think, was part of the rural outreach director. It wasn't so much that Kamala Harris needed to win rural areas. She probably will not. It's called the lose by less philosophy. It's losing by less in red districts, in red counties, because this race is so tight, so close. A few thousand votes here, 500 votes there are going to make the difference. And there are many of those votes out there that have been identified. And a rural outreach director for the Democratic Party, for the Harris-Walz ticket, is showing that she has a plan to win this race. You couple that with Republicans for Harris. If you watch my content here and on TikTok, I've told you all for the last 6 to 8 months that there was going to be an organized, well-funded effort of Republicans to support the head of the Democratic ticket, which we thought was going to be Joe Biden. Then it turns out to be Kamala Harris. That would be well-financed, that would be organized, that would be comprised of never Trumpers, no surprise there, but would also be made up of former congresspersons, former staffers of those congresspersons, talking about Republicans now, former Republican governors, former Republican senators, former Republican state legislators, former Republican state executive officers, lieutenant governors and the like, former staffers to all of those particular offices. But we surprisingly found out that it was also made up of former Trump administration employees and hires and appointees that he had made who said that he was not fit to be president again. And not only would that be a well-financed effort, I told you that it would not be Democrats talking to Republicans about Republicans for Harris. I said it was going to be Republicans talking to other Republicans about why they should vote for the top of the ticket. And that is what has manifested itself. And it's not just a name only. Most campaigns have the opposite party for said candidate put a name in the blank. But this one is authentic and has people like Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney and several administration officials from the Trump administration and several former governors and the like. And they all have come out basically and hit the campaign trail. Who are they campaigning towards and for? Whose votes are they advocating for? They're going after the, again, lose by less group of population, people amenable to potentially voting for a Democrat for the first time. But they're talking to Republicans. They're talking to that Ronald Reagan conservative mainstream Republicans, the 15% of the party who resent MAGA taking it over. And they are talking to suburban, white, well-educated men and women who potentially will come over. Is she going to win a majority of those? Of course not. But Republicans for Harris is in the field trying to get as many votes as possible. And in a tight race, a few 500 here, a few 1,000 there will make the difference. Third example that shows Harris has a plan. She took her time developing a policy plan and unveiling it at different points. Yes, when everyone was screaming and hollering from the alt-right and the right that Kamala Harris doesn't have a plan. She doesn't have a program. She's not talking any issues. I can't vote for her. I mean, what are her issues? As if you knew Donald Trump's issues, but I digress. But the reality was that she took her time developing it. She knew she had to differentiate herself from Joe Biden. She is not Joe Biden part 2. She was never that. No vice presidential candidate is. When Joe Biden was Barack Obama's vice president, he told the line. He did what Barack Obama told him to do. He did the assignments that were assigned to him. And when he decided to run for president on his own, he broke from a lot of the orthodoxies of the Obama administration. What's one example of that? Public education. Barack Obama and Arnie Duncan, his Secretary of Education, were more supportive, more in league and in line with achievement and merit and supporting a public school choice. The greatest increase in the charter schools program, the one federal line item for public charter schools in the federal budget was increased exponentially and to its greatest extent by Barack Obama. And you had things like Race to the Top. But when Joe Biden became the nominee, became president, he was a lot more aligned with traditional district school solutions and policies, aligned more with the teachers unions than the Barack Obama administration. Again, there are differences. And so Kamala Harris, in that same vein as Joe Biden, is crafted her own plan, her own way forward, her own way to deal with the border, her own way to deal with our allies, her own way of dealing with the next step of coming out of COVID and dealing with inflation and those kind of issues. And she rolled out her economic plan based on what she thought was needed at the moment to talk about. Everyone's talking about high prices and inflation. So she firstly came out with talking about making sure that major companies did not price gouge folks. And she made sure that she concentrated on the lack of ability because of high interest rates to get homes and to build out housing. And so she put out her plan for home ownership. She doubled down on the tax credit for children, doubling that because she recognizes that people who have families and small children are getting the brunt of these high prices. And so she promoted those things. She then lastly reeled out her mantra and her plan for sandwich families. I can relate to that. I'm a sandwich family. That simply is a fancy little colloquialism for saying a family that has to deal with aging parents and have to deal with young children. And there are a lot of Americans who are in that position. I'm similarly situated, and she's speaking to me when she talks about that. Most recently, she came out with a plan for African American males because that was something that was lacking from a group of folks that she needs their votes, and so she put out that plan last. Again, these are examples that show that Harris has a plan and a map of how she plans on winning this election. The fourth example of why that shows that Harris has a plan is her media availability and schedule. And people, again, complained as much as they complained about her not having any policies. They then said her media availability is suspect. Why doesn't she talk to the media? Why doesn't she talk to the press? What's wrong with her? Why is she avoiding it? She's avoiding it, but she's an empty suit. She doesn't have anything. Well, her media availability and her schedule was timed to when people were actually paying attention and, most importantly, voting. There is a method to her methodology. So initially, she did nothing. No media availability. No schedule for any. Why? Because she was putting her plan together. Because she was deciding what pieces of the Biden administration's policies and plans did she want to incorporate into her own and what she didn't. She wanted to look at what families were really hoping for, praying for, demanding from their elected officials. And she crafted it as such. She took her time doing it. Then she moved on to reporters, talking to reporters after rallies. So she talked to local reporters. If she had a rally in Pittsburgh, she would talk to local reporters in Pittsburgh. If she had a rally in Nashville. She would never go to Tennessee. That state is already all red. But if she went to North Carolina, she would go to Charlotte and she would talk to local press there and talk to local newspapers there. Then she moved on to what? Social media access, right? To having social media folks, content creators at the DNC. It was some of the most futuristic ways of using social media that has ever happened at a national convention. And she did that at the DNC. And, those are the things that, again, started getting her out there. Then she started talking to local press after rallies, meaning that she started talking to TV stations, not just reporters, not just local stations. She started talking to big stations that were, their local affiliates in certain places. Again, after rallies, she started meeting with the black press. She put them all on her plane and gave them access, unprecedented access to a political campaign. And then she went to NABJ. You know NABJ, the National Association of Black Journalists. the site of the crime, the scene of the crime, where Donald Trump basically embarrassed himself and showed his ineptitude about knowing anything about black people and not having any kind of knowledge or any kind of recognition of the room. She went there and gave the kind of interview that you should give to chronicle and long-serving and extremely bright people of the black press. And then she decided to start going to social media sites. She went to sites here and there and showed herself and let her hair down. And then there came the Oprah, right, outreach. And then there came the debate, right? And she smoked Donald Trump in the debate and got the press talking about that. That went a buzz. And then she went broader. She went on 60 Minutes. She went on the top two online, one of the top two online presence and call her daddy. She went on the Howard Stern show, Baba Booey to you all. As a Howard Stern fan myself, she went on Colbert. She just most recently did the Breakfast Club. And she just did today Fox News. Yes, a Democrat running for president went on Fox News and is contemplating and negotiating to go on Joe Rogan, the #1 podcaster in America, who again skews to the right and to white males. Now, why is that an example that Harris has a plan to win this election? It's the media availability, and she's timed it to coincide with when people are paying attention to the race, voting early, getting absentee ballots, and trying to make their last-minute decisions. Is it going to help her win states by a million votes? No. Will it help her win states by a few tens of thousand votes? Yes. And the timing of it shows it. Kamala Harris is so comfortable with her status right now and where she is in this campaign that she's willing to risk it to go on Fox News. She's willing to go try to talk to the few Nikki Haley voters that are out there for her to snatch. She's willing to take that risk in order to get them, in order to present a different side. And yes, to even show how unbalanced and how much of a PR firm to the Trump campaign that Fox News actually is. Because she recognizes, again, another example that shows she has a plan, that there are 15%, you know my number, of Ronald Reagan mainstream conservative Republicans who are not voting for Donald Trump. But they've yet to be convinced to vote for Kamala Harris. Going on Fox, going on Joe Rogan, going on even Howard Stern and some of the other places that tend to have an audience that leans a little right of center at the very least, is a way to say, I'm here, here's what I stand for, and I'm not going to let others paint me in terms of what your understanding is about my candidacy, what my priorities are, what my plans are for you and your family in a new administration. She's taken her case directly to the voters, and that shows, yes, a plan. The fifth reason and the fifth example that shows Harris has a plan is that she is focusing on early voting. Now, why is she doing that? Because voting early is what the Democratic Party needs to push up turnout. Kamala Harris recognizes what I've been saying here for months, that Donald Trump has not recognized, even with under 20 days left. Kamala Harris knows that she has a mountain to climb, just like I've told you that Donald Trump has a mountain to climb. And Kamala Harris's mountain is that she must replicate the turnout of 2020 in 2024. Now, there was a lot of pushback as to whether that would happen or not, right? There was a lot of doubts that Joe Biden could muster that kind of turnout again. Indeed, every indication showed that he could not. But since Kamala Harris has gotten into the race, enthusiasm has gone through the roof. And she is approaching, with 20 some odd days left, the enthusiasm and the targeted polling that shows she is close to matching the turnout. If Kamala Harris cannot match the turnout of 2020 and 2024, she does not win this race. And she's getting close, and she has more avenues to do it than Donald Trump does, and she is focusing on it. And one way to do that is to do it early voting happening and happening fast. Why do I say that? because early voting, if you vote early, and I do indicate to you all that you should go vote early, if you vote early, it allows those canvassers, those targeting books that David Plouffe and the campaign have put together for canvassers and people trying to get out the vote. If you vote, doesn't tell them who you voted for, but they have you as likely to vote and likely to vote for their candidate. They know when you vote. And guess what happens when they find out that you vote and you're on their target list? They check you off. And that allows them to use resources, time, volunteers, and effort to go after the low information voter on their target list, to go after the harder to come out voter on their list, to go after the person who may be inclined to sit the selection out. It gives them the ability and the resources and the manpower to go after those voters earlier and to convert them later, right before November 5th gets around here. Again, it's a plan that shows Harris is serious about winning this election. And the sixth and last example that shows that Kamala Harris has a plan is that she has shown Trump for the fool that he is. Donald Trump has melted down. If you follow my content, I tell you that he has melted down. He has melted down. MAGA is being melted down from within. And as she said, the DNC, I'm not going to tell you not to vote for Donald Trump. I'm going to tell you to go look at his rallies and listen to what he has to say. Well, she has gone a step further. She now takes clips of his rallies, clips of his press conferences, clips of his speaking, clips of his addressing economic policy folks in clubs around the country, clips of his addressing interviews, clips of him melting down and showing them at her rallies and making commercials about them and making ads and digital ads showing how unfocused, how unhinged, and to be frank with you, how maybe mentally incompetent Donald Trump is. And when is she doing it? She's doing it when early voting is starting, when absentee ballots are being asked for, and people are paying attention to the race. Donald Trump picked the worst time to start a meltdown because the candidate he's running against is whooping his tail with it. And what are 6 things that show Donald Trump does not have a plan? Well, the first thing that shows Donald Trump does not have a plan is his campaign stops. When you're running in a race as tight as this is, you cannot afford to waste any time in any state that is not a battleground state. And while Donald Trump is visiting battleground states, not trying to pretend like he's not, he's also giving speeches in New York State, trying to tell people he can win New York. He's giving speeches at Coachella in California as if he can actually win California. He's giving speeches in places like Chicago and the like. And why? Why is he doing that? He went to Aurora, Colorado. Why? Because he's trying to make points and show up the things he's saying. And as he's doing so, he's getting bad press. Yes, he spoke in New York and couldn't answer basic questions from a friendly audience of people you would think would be Republicans. He spoke at Coachella and disastrously had hundreds of people stranded walking 5 miles back to their cars because Trump campaign bust people in, but didn't bust people out. It's kind of like the motel, roaches check in, but roaches don't check out, right? I would never call a Trump supporter that, but it does mimic the whole point of coming in and not finding a way out. Hey, Black Uhuru, thanks for rocking with us, buddy. And then he went to Aurora, Colorado to try to, I guess, show how the Venezuelan gangs were taking over housing buildings and housing authorities and taking over the city. And the Republican mayor of Aurora said it's not happening. He went to Wisconsin, and while Wisconsin is a battleground state, he went to a spot where, near Springfield, where, again, none of this stuff is happening with Haitians. And each place he goes to that is outside the battleground states, yes, exactly, Black Uhuru. You get a bell chip for that. And the reality is that these campaign stops are not benefiting his campaign. But it shows he doesn't have a plan. The second reason why we know Donald Trump does not have a plan to win this race is the rhetoric he's using. As you hear me say on my content all the time, Donald Trump, after the assassination attempt on his life, We even had people like me who don't support him who were waiting to hear his voice, waiting to hear him cast a big net, waiting to hear him expand his coalition, grow his big tent. Never heard it. He had an opportunity at that time to say, and I'm going to paraphrase what I think he should have said to America, was that, listen, there was an attempt on my life. And having an attempt on your life, having almost lost your life, can actually make you think differently about who you are and how you say things and how you treat people. And if I want to use this opportunity here at the Republican National Convention to say, if I've ever offended you, if I've ever said anything that was colorless, humorless, hurtful, scornful, mean, nasty, let me apologize. Charge it to my head, not to my heart. I want, in my zeal and in my quest to try to make America great again, I may have done things, said things, presented myself in ways that turned you off. Well, I want to start anew. I want to extend my hand and welcome you and bring you aboard this caravan. And I promise you going forward that my motto after this day won't be a Make America Great Again. It'll be Make America Great Again for everyone. Oh my gosh. The bells and whistles would have gone off. Independents would have started checking for him again. Those 15% of Ronald Reagan mainstream conservative Republicans may have given him a second look, the Nikki Haley vote, if you will. But he didn't do that. At the convention, he doubled down on MAGA red meat. And he's been doing that since the campaign. And why is he doing that? It's because Donald Trump and his campaign has realized too late that he cannot climb the mountain that he must climb in order to win November 5th. Remember I told you that Kamala Harris had a mountain to climb if she wants to win November 5th. And I told you she has a plan for it. She has to get 2024 turnout numbers that equal or better the 2020 turnout numbers for the Democratic ticket. She's working on that. But do you know what Donald Trump's mountain that he must climb is? Donald Trump's mountain to climb is that he must find some way to win independence. If Donald Trump does not win independence, and I'm the only pundit telling you this, he does not win November 5th. What's our proof of this? Our proof is, as I say it all the time, is that Donald Trump barely beat Hillary Clinton in 2016 in the blue wall states by a few thousand votes here and there. How did he do that? Donald Trump won independence in 2016. You know what has happened to Donald Trump's political fortune since then? He has not won independence since 2016. He did not win them in the midterms of 2018. He did not win them when he ran for re-election in 2020. Donald Trump did not lose in 2020 because of voter fraud. He lost because he did not win independence. And in 2022, the big red wave that never came, never materialized on these wonderful shores of the USA because of what? Say it with me, choir. Altos, sopranos, tenors, and yes, the basses in the room. Say it with me in a loud, commanding voice. Because Donald Trump did not win independence. That's the reason why. And in 2024, he was leading with independence when Joe Biden was at the head of the ticket. And since Kamala Harris has gotten to the top of the ticket, he is down by 9, and some people will say 16 points with independence. And he has done nothing, absolutely nothing, to try to get them back. What he has done, realizing that it's too late to get those voters, too late to get the independents, too late to win back the 15% of Ronald Reagan conservative mainstream Republicans. He is doubling down. He is tripling down. He is quadrupling down on the rhetoric that is MAGA, praying, hoping that if by some miracle, that if all of them come out in record turnout numbers, he can win this vote. He can win this election. But I got news for you, Donald Trump. Those 47 signs that you have at your rallies, that is the number you may reach. Even that's going to be a tough climb. That's the number you may reach if everything breaks your way with your base. MAGA base, in and of itself and by itself, cannot win the race. He needs independence. And Donald Trump is not going to win independence because his rhetoric, his actions, his policies are not trying to outreach to them. And that's how I know he does not have a plan to win this race. The third reason why I know Donald Trump does not have a plan to win this race is his get out the vote effort is being run by Turning Point USA. Yes, if you don't know what Turning Point USA, Google it. It is a right-wing, scratch that. It is an alt-right wing outfit led by Charlie Kirk, the sort of nouveau riche white male Republican that's out here sort of being the face of the next generation of alt-right folks. And they have an app that they are trying to get state Republican folks to chime in with, to use to get out the vote effort together. Now, this has only happened 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, which is already too late. But guess what? It's a grift. Charlie Kirk's mother-in-law serves on the board of the very firm and company that produces this particular GOTV effort. And Inside Baseball here in D.C. has told me that most of the GOP state directors are peeved that this is the only thing they have in order to do, their GOTV efforts. And the campaign supports it. The fourth reason that I know Donald Trump does not have a plan to win is because of these polls. Now, you may say to yourself, well, the polls are tight. The polls are not as tight as you may think. What has happened has been there have been a flood of right-wing and alt-right polling companies that have started, and they have pushed and pushed and pushed to try and get you and the big numbers of people who watch the trends of polls to say and show that Donald Trump is winning this race. Let me play you this so you can get a better feel for what I'm talking about.
Watching this, though, may say, hey, it looks like when I've been seeing some of these state results, particularly, Donald Trump is gaining back some of the ground that he had previously lost following the debate. In some of these state polls, Donald Trump looks like he's up in some of these state polls. And now this is something that you spearheaded in 2022, calling out, though, the fact that there were all of these Republican manufactured polls to try to skew the averages, to create this appearance of a red wave, with ultimately the goal to suppress the vote, exhaust voters, and to make pro-democracy Democratic voters feel that their vote doesn't matter and that there's no chance their candidate's going to win. You add on top of this right now these betting markets. That's been a new trend that we've just seen in 2024, the biggest one being this Poly Market account. And it's being pushed by all of the prominent MAGA people, lots of social media influencers posting. Here's what you wrote about it earlier in the day. You said, it's literally unbelievable that an offshore crypto-based betting market that Americans themselves cannot bet on. Let me repeat that. Americans cannot bet in this market has become a credible source of information about our elections this year.
So let me stop you there and stop him there, because if you don't know what this is actually a crypto-based betting market. It's offshore, as the commentator says. Americans can't even participate in it. It's literally a red flag waving international non-American influence on how we view elections. And people use this as if it's credible. There's a CNBC host that's promoting it. And trying to say, like, look, 60% of America supports Harris by this market share. When we know nothing is further from the truth. Reality is that people are making money and grifting off of trying to prove to you that not only is this race close, but that Donald Trump has some built-in advantage. I told you all that was what was going to happen as we got closer to the end of this race. The mainstream media, that 24-hour cable news networks, I told you that alt-right and yes, even alt-left folks on your favorite YouTube channels and TikTok channels are going to be pushing this brand of, I know what's going on, I can prove it to you what's going on because of this, that, and the other. There are literally 29 polling outfits out there, Republican leaning, that are just trying to show and prove to you that they can influence the election. Yes, they're out here. And that's why polling is skewed this year. When I tell you that these things are not close to happening, they're not close to happening. Donald Trump is losing in ways that you cannot imagine. And what's our proof of this? Well, proof is early voting. The state of Georgia had a record day, Over 300,000 people voted on the first day of early voting. You know which party votes early? You know which party is minded well? The Democrats. You know what party stays away from early voting? The Republicans. And while we're even seeing a little bit of uptick amongst Republicans, it's nowhere near what the Democrats are doing. You know what Detroit is doing in its early voting patterns in Michigan? First of all, Michigan as a state is early voting heavy. But you know who's representing 45% of the early votes that have come in so far? Just so far? Detroit. You know, the city that Donald Trump says is what all Americans are going to look like if you elect Kamala Harris. Well, looks like Detroit people didn't like that. And looks like Detroit people decided that they were going to push back and they were going to show Donald Trump what they think about him talking about their city. So that's one of the reasons why, again, Donald Trump does not have a plan to win this election. Then his last two things I'll do very quickly because we're running out of time here are the attacks. The attacks on Kamala Harris are not really about her record. It's calling her dumb. It's calling her stupid. It's saying she's mentally, inept. Now, Donald Trump is actually attacking her the way a 4-year-old would attack somebody. You're ugly. Well, you're uglier than I am. You're dumb. Well, you're dumber than I am. It's literally what this man says every time there's an attack that comes across the bow at him. His attacks are not broadening his base. His attacks are not helping anyone commit to him. In fact, his attacks seem kind of off-putting, bizarre, weird, odd, like an old man, telling you not to play on his lawn, right? And why? And when is that happening? How is he looking unhinged? How is he looking crazy? He's doing it when everybody's deciding how they're going to vote. Last thing that shows that Donald Trump does not have a plan to win is his voter fraud training. Now listen, as I mentioned to you before, Kamala Harris, Democrats have trained thousands, tens of thousands of volunteers to go into these battleground states, to go into these purple districts, to go into these red districts so they can lose by less. It's been an organized effort. It's been widespread, and it's mining and picking low-hanging fruit. But you can tell by the early voting numbers in a number of these battleground states, that's their fruit paying off. And what has Donald Trump done? He has trained tens of thousands to look for voter fraud and to go into, I would dare say, urban communities to try to document voter fraud. These are not canvassers for votes for Donald Trump to win on November 5th. These are people who are canvassing and looking and taking pictures and creating conspiracy theories to try to win this election on November 6th. And that is the difference between the campaign. But it's not an organized effort, and it's definitely not an effort to try and drag and pull your votes to the poll. Listen, if you're running this race with 20 days left, your idea is you have at this point, you would have had to identify all your votes. You would have had to engage with all your voters. You have had to try to get them to early vote and knock on their doors to get absentee ballots and to vote, as I said, to vote early so that you can then take them off your list so that the campaigns can go after less participating voters. And that's how you build a record to run. How do I know this? Because it's how I ran my 2 successful campaigns for political office. And the first one I won convincingly. The second one I won with 83% of the vote. That's how you run a campaign. And Donald Trump is not running a campaign. He's actually running a grievance. And the reason why he's running it, and I'll tie it up with this bow, the reason why Donald Trump and the Republican Party, in terms of his campaign, are running it this way is because they know what the real numbers are too. And the real numbers they know shows he's not going to win this election. And there's not much more with less than 3 weeks to go that his campaign can do to win this race. And that's why I continue to stick by my numbers that I gave you 3 weeks ago. And what are those numbers? Harris, 56% of the vote to Donald Trump's. I'm sorry, Harris, 53% of the vote to Donald Trump's 46% of the vote. You can book it, you can mark it, and you can say you heard it here first. All right. So, the prelude. Or no, after, actually not the prelude, what's the afterlude? Whatever that's called. So what happens to the Republican Party after Donald Trump loses? What happens to the Republican Party after Donald Trump loses? For that, we have to go back in history and get a perspective as to what the Republican Party's iterations have been over the years. So, without further ado,
This way, you have to go back to when it first came into existence in 1854, just 7 years before the Civil War. There are two parties at this point, the Whigs and the Democrats. America is quickly expanding westward, and there's an intense debate over whether or not new states should permit slavery. The Democratic Party, with strong support in the South, has become increasingly pro-slavery. But the Whigs are divided on the issue. Their northern supporters are really afraid that the growing number of slave states would have too much political influence, which they feared could really hurt free white workers economically. So in 1854, the country is debating whether or not the territories of Kansas and Nebraska should allow slavery. The Whigs can't agree, and the party ends up collapsing. The former Whigs in the North form a new party that will fight against letting slavery expand any further. They call it the Republican Party. By 1860, the Republican Party has become increasingly powerful in the North, enough so that a little-known Republican named Abraham Lincoln wins the presidency. Even though Lincoln promises he won't interfere with slavery in states that already have it, he and his party are still too anti-slavery for the South to tolerate. So 11 southern states secede from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America. The northern states decide to fight to keep the Union together, and the Civil War ensues. The result is a northern victory and the abolition of slavery nationwide. After the war, Republicans begin fighting to ensure that recently freed slaves in the South have their rights. A year after Lincoln's assassination, the party passes the Civil Rights Act of 1866. They fight to make sure that black men have the same right to vote with new laws and constitutional amendments. But something had happened during the Civil War that began changing the young Republican Party. Government spending during the war made many northern businessmen really rich. Gradually, these wealthy financiers and industrialists start taking more and more of a leadership role in the Republican Party. They want to hold on to power, and they don't think that fighting for black rights in a mostly white country is the best way to do that. Meanwhile, the South is resisting these new racial reforms, often violently. And most white Republican voters and leaders now feel that they've done enough for black citizens in the South, and it's time to emphasize other issues. So in 1870, the party basically gives up on reforming the South, deciding instead to leave it to its own devices. The region becomes politically dominated by white Democrats. Fast forward to the new century. By the 1920s, the Republican Party has become essentially the party of big business. This works out quite well for them as the economy is booming, but not so well when the economy crashes in 1929 and the Great Depression begins. Franklin D. Roosevelt and other Democrats are swept into power and begin dramatically expanding the size and role of the federal government in an attempt to fight the Depression and better provide for Americans. Republicans oppose this rapid expansion, defining themselves as opposition to big government, an identity that the party still holds today. Going into the 50s and 60s, race and the South returned to the forefront of national politics, with the civil rights movement attempting to end segregation and ensure.
So let me stop it there, because this is where, again, when you hear black Republicans specifically talk about, we're the party that freed the slaves, we're the party, the Democrats were part of the party of the Klan, they're telling the truth. It's not a lie. What they don't tell you is that parties change. Parties change and amorphosize into something completely different at times, and sometimes they trade positions as to where they are. Before, and again, most young Republicans, I'm old enough to remember that there was a time when Republicans had a lot of different factions. There were conservative Republicans, there were moderate Republicans, there were liberal Republicans. And some of you who are like under 50 or 60 years of age may say, well, wait a minute, what do you mean liberal Republicans? Yes, the Republican Party in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and even somewhat into the 70s, had a kaleidoscope, at least a spectrum of different types of republicanism. But what happened in 1964 was that, and as you see, as the history will tell you as we go a little further here, the Republican Party started to change. Yes, they were racists like Strom Thurmond and George Wallace, who were Democrats, who were Dixiecrats, who were against civil rights. And that was the Democratic Party back then. You can't run from it. That's the history, right? Even Robert Byrd, who, was a U.S. Senator from West Virginia, was a former Klan member. But what happened in 1964 was that the Republicans nominated for the first time in its history a very conservative Republican named Barry Goldwater. And Barry Goldwater is literally the first Republican presidential candidate to oppose the Civil Rights Bill. And he opposed the Civil Rights Bill of 1964. Now, it is true that Republican votes helped the 1964 Civil Rights Act become law. But it wasn't just Republican votes, as black Republicans like Candace Owens would have you believe. No, it was a combination of Republicans in the North with Democrats in the North. And that's how it got passed. But something interesting that happened right after that was that all those Dixiecrats, those racist Democrats who didn't like civil rights, within 5 years of the passage and the signing of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, you know which party they joined? They joined the Republican Party. So Strom Thurmond, racist, anti-black, segregationist, former governor of the state of South Carolina and now senator, re-registers and becomes a Republican. George Wallace, racist, standing in the tunnels of the University of Alabama fighting desegregation efforts, leaves the Democratic Party and becomes a Republican, right? So the party that used to be for black rights becomes a party that is now the house and home of racists trying to oppress black votes. And the party of Democrats that used to be anti-black now becomes the party of the black voter.
Sure, blacks truly have the right to vote. The civil rights debate isn't a purely partisan issue. It's more of a regional issue, with Northerners from both parties supporting it and Southerners from both parties opposing it.
See?
Then, in 1964, it's Democratic President Lyndon Johnson who signs the Civil Rights Act into law. And it's Republican presidential nominee Barry Goldwater who opposes it, arguing that it expands government power too much. A massive switch-up takes place. Black voters, some of whom had already been shifting from the Republican Party, convert almost entirely to their new advocates, the Democrats. The white voters in the South, who had been staunch Democrats, start to really resent the big government interference here and in other matters like abortion rights and school prayer. Over the next 3 decades, whites in the South switch to the GOP, which makes the South an overwhelmingly Republican region. By the 1980s, the party begins to resemble the GOP we are familiar with today. Republicans elect Ronald Reagan, who promises to fight for business interests, lower taxes, and traditional family.
So now Ronald Reagan is the political and policy heir to the Barry Goldwater campaign of 1964 and his way of thinking in terms of the Republican Party. Barry Goldwater loses to Lyndon Johnson in 1964 in one of the greatest landslides in history. So he was ahead of his time, but his progeny politically is Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan wins the presidency in 1980. He remakes the Republican Party into a conservative Republican Party. Long are gone are the days of Republican Governor Rockefeller, head of the Liberals. Long gone then are Senator Edward Brooke, Republican black senator from Massachusetts. Long gone is the father of affirmative action, black Republican Arthur Fletcher. Long gone even is Richard Nixon, who is the president who implemented affirmative action in federal policy and federal government in terms of hiring and contracts and the like. It's not some flaming liberal idea. It was the administration of a moderate Republican compared to today in Richard Nixon.
Values. As the 21st century begins, America is going through a major demographic shift in the form of Hispanic immigration, both legal and illegal. Democrats and business elites tend to support reforming immigration laws so that the over 10 million unauthorized immigrants in the U.S. would get legal status. On the Republican side, tough on immigration policies and rhetoric became popular. But this ends up costing the Republicans when, in 2012, Mitt Romney loses his bid for the presidency. He gets blown out among Hispanic voters. Exit polls showed that 71% of them voted for Barack Obama. So the Republican Party starts to look more like a party for white voters in an increasingly non-white country. Given these demographic trends, Republican leaders worry that if they keep losing Hispanic voters by that much, they'll lose their chances of ever winning the presidency. So in 2013, some key Republicans in the Senate, including the rising star Marco Rubio, collaborate with Democrats on an immigration reform bill that would give unauthorized immigrants a path to legal status. But there's a huge backlash from the Republican Party's predominantly white base, which views the bill as amnesty for immigrants who broke the rules. This exacerbates the GOP voters' mistrust in their own party leaders, a mistrust that has already been growing for some time. And that makes the political landscape of 2015 fertile ground for a figure like Donald Trump, an outsider businessman who wants to build a wall on the border of Mexico. Trump isn't a traditional conservative, but he appealed to the resentment and the mistrust of party leaders that Republican primary voters had, as well as the strong opposition to growing immigration trends. And even though he was loathed by party leaders, he won enough support in the primaries to become the GOP nominee for president. So now the Republican Party is once again at a major crossroads as it tries to meet the political challenges of the 21st century. It's up to Republican voters and leaders to decide just what they want their party to be.
So, this is where we are, folks. What happens now when Trump loses on November 5th? What happens to the Republican Party? Do they find a way to open back up, to expand and become a majority party? Because let's be frank, the only reason why the Republican Party is even nominally in the fight to win the presidency is because of the cult of personality that is Donald Trump. Numerically, and in terms of registration rolls around the country, the Republicans are not the majority party. They're very far off. Donald Trump won the presidency in 2016, but he lost the popular vote nationwide, significantly so. Donald Trump loses the Electoral College closely in 2020, but he loses the popular vote again by a drastic number. And it looks like, again, he is about to lose the vote again nationwide by a big number. But we don't pick our presidents by popular vote. We pick them by the Electoral College, which is, again, why he's still in this race. But if there were not for the cult of personality to make the base of the Republican Party rabid and to come out in big, large turnout numbers, the Republican Party would have been swamped in 2016, swamped in 2020. They were beaten in midterm elections without a top person at the ticket. And so the Republican Party is going to pick one or two pathways. They can go back to being the party of Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan, by the way, was a supporter of immigration reform, not just putting the more stronger border security, but actually defining a pathway to citizenship. With this little documentary, this short did not show you, was that Marco Rubio and his gang of five, I think that's what they were, gang of eight, which were different Republicans and Democrats trying to find a bipartisan answer to the bill, much like the bipartisan bill that was passed, that was tried to be passed by Biden and Harris, that was stopped by Donald Trump. Both Ronald Reagan and George Bush supported comprehensive immigration reform, and that is the standard tradition of the Republican Party. So Marco Rubio wasn't going outside of the normal sort of policy parameters of the Republican Party. He was very much in that theme. He was very much in that orthodoxy. But Donald Trump was something other than a conservative, something other than a Republican. And so the party can go back to being Ronald Reagan conservative party, or it can double down on being MAGA. My thinking is very clear. I think the way forward for the Republican Party is they're going to have to try and get back to some of the policy prescriptions of the Republican Party that appeal to a new generation of people. That is a comprehensive pathway for immigration, as well as strong borders. It's going to have to embrace the things that are popular with the growing number of black and brown people in this country, things that go beyond party labels like public school choice or like being, small business development and middle class tax cuts, the things that actually matter to people. They're going to have to find a 21st century version of that, but they're still going to have to appeal to the MAGA base of the party because that's where the juice is. That's where the energy is. And I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if you can appeal to the MAGA base without Donald Trump and get the same kind of turnouts you get with him on the ticket, factually and actually, or whether you can harken back to the spirit of Donald Trump in the same way the Republicans harken back to the spirit of Ronald Reagan. That's going to be their challenge going forward. And it's going to be interesting to see the candidates that run for president in 2028, the Tim Scotts of the world, the Marco Rubios of the world, the DeSantis of the world, the Nikki Haley's of the world, and about 12 or 13 others who feel like they can throw their hats in. There's going to be a combination of MAGA Republicans. There's going to be a combination of traditional Ronald Reagan mainstream Republicans. And this fight from 2016 for the soul of the party can begin in earnest all over again. The only solace that Republicans can actually take is that the Democrats would be pretty much united in what we want to do because we will have an incumbent in Kamala Harris. And whereas most people thought that this was going to be 28 was going to be a wide open race for the Democrats and the Republicans, it is now a sold up race if Kamala Harris wins this presidency this year. And the fighting, the turmoil, the angling for good position is going to start literally right after the midterms in 2026. But I'm just going to get my popcorn, a little hot sauce to put on top of it, a nice cool beer. I'm going to watch the fireworks from a distance. Have at it, Republicans. Save your party or go deeper in the mire and the mud. That's all I have for you guys tonight. Short but sweet, only 2 topics. Again, I apologize for the technical difficulties, but I felt like I had to go live. And if you couldn't see my wonderful face, you could hear my wonderful voice. If you like what you hear, if this was somewhat informative and somewhat educational for you, spread the word for us. Let other people know about this. We go live every Wednesday night, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Be there, be square. But make sure before you leave us, you subscribe, you like, throw some comments in there. Thanks, Black Uhuru. Black Uhuru is my MVP. He's my main guy here. I don't know what Minnie Sprock is. She's usually here too. But thank you guys for rocking with us. Thank you for listening. Be part of what we're trying to do here. And we're adding it and building it as we fly. Thank you, man. Very educational. I appreciate you. Yes, you are the MVP, most valuable player. Yeah, spread the word. We try to do something that's different than what you see on mainstream media. Try to do something that's different than what you see in the 24-hour cable news network or what you see from other content carriers here. When I make something definitive, when we say something definitive, we mean it. We have data and statistics to back us up. As you can see here, and with no respect to a person, opinion, or ideology or your algorithm. In fact, we tell you to break your algorithm because all it does is serve you to keep you in a cocoon and away from other thoughts, opinions, ideas, principles, and thinking. And that makes you less of a person as well. Expand your horizons. Break your cocoon. Break your algorithm. Join us here in the middle. Let's have spirited debate. But let's base it on something that's real, not bumper stickers, not what you see on Newsmax or MSNBC. Have an opinion, back it up, and learn. Stay curious. And remember, think. It ain't illegal yet. And I'm out. Peace.